The chamber had no windows. That had always bothered Ambassador Kael Draven. 47 species had built this station together, spending decades and fortunes constructing something meant to represent the highest achievement of galactic civilization, and no one had thought to put windows in the main council chamber. He had mentioned it once, years ago, to a junior aide from the Thalari delegation. The aide had looked at him like he had said something mildly offensive. Humans, Kael had learned, were the only ones who needed to see the sky. He stood at the human podium now, his hands flat on the cool surface, and listened to the sound of a decision being made that would change everything. The translation devices hummed their quiet electronic hum. Around him, the representatives of 46 other species sat in their tiered seats, their varied forms draped in the diplomatic colors of their worlds. Some looked satisfied, a few looked nervous, several would not meet his eyes. He had been watching it build for over a year. The closed sessions he was not invited to, the conversations that stopped the moment he turned a corner, the small slights accumulated like sediment that told him what was coming before any official word was spoken. He had written about it in his reports home. His superiors had told him to remain patient, remain professional, remain present. He had done all three. High Speaker Vora of the Athari Collective raised two of her segmented forearms, and the chamber fell into formal silence. Her compound eyes swept the room once before she spoke. The vote is complete. The motion carries with 40 counts in favor, 6 opposed, and 1 abstention. Effective immediately, all human military vessels are to be restricted to the designated corridors outlined in Appendix 7. Human colonial settlements in contested boundary zones are to be vacated within 6 standard months. Human personnel assigned to joint security operations will be relieved and replaced by Council-appointed forces within 30 days. Councillor Greth Vaughn of the Soren Sovereignty leaned back in his wide chair with the slow, deliberate ease of someone who had been waiting a long time for a moment to arrive. His scales were oiled, catching the chamber light in iridescent patterns. He had spent nearly 3 years building the coalition that made this vote possible, and now he sat in that victory with visible pleasure. He had called humanity the Ashborn in public addresses, a species cradled by a planet that should have killed them, shaped by violence into something that looked like civilization but was not. Too quick to act, too difficult to predict, too much like the old empires that had burned whole star systems before the Council existed to stop them. The other species had listened. 40 of them had agreed. Behind Kael, his head of security, Commander Sarah Voss, stood at parade attention. She had been born in the colonies, raised on a frontier station that had survived 3 pirate raids before she was 12 years old. She had spent 20 years in the fleet protecting borders that other species slept safely behind. He could feel her anger like standing next to an open furnace door. "Ambassador Draven," said High Speaker Vora, "do you wish to address the chamber?" Kael looked out at the assembled representatives for a long moment. Some returned his gaze, most did not. "Yes," he said, "I do." His voice was calm and even, and carried clearly to every corner of the chamber. Humanity has been honored to serve alongside the Galactic Council and its member species for 21 years. In that time, our soldiers have died on borders that were not theirs. Our engineers have built infrastructure that serves worlds they have never visited. Our merchants created trade corridors through regions that no one else was willing to reach. Our doctors have worked in outbreak zones and disaster areas across 46 worlds. He paused, not for effect, because he wanted them to sit inside the truth for just a moment before the next part.
We understand your decision. We respect the Council's sovereignty, and we will honor it completely. Humanity will begin full withdrawal immediately. Greth Vaughn's expression shifted, just slightly. He had expected anger or pleading, or at minimum the performance of wounded pride. He had anticipated a negotiation. That was what the Ashborn were supposed to do: react, escalate, give him something to point to. Instead, he was looking at a man who had simply agreed to leave. All human military forces will withdraw from Council space within 30 days, Kael continued. All human trade infrastructure will be decommissioned within 60. All joint research initiatives will be concluded, and all human technology, personnel, and materials will be returned to human space. The embassy will be cleared within 48 hours. Voices rose throughout the chamber. Several representatives leaned toward one another in urgent, whispered exchanges. The Plethian trade delegate, Muada, looked visibly distressed. His species had built half their export economy around human shipping lanes. "Ambassador," said High Speaker Vora, raising her arms again, "the Council voted for restrictions, not for complete withdrawal." Kael allowed himself one small, tired smile. "With great respect, High Speaker, we understand what this vote means. You do not trust us. You have made that clear. We cannot serve effectively under those conditions, and we will not remain where we are not welcome. Humanity will withdraw with professionalism and without bitterness. We will not be a burden to you." He picked up his credentials and his data folio, turned, and walked toward the door. Commander Voss fell into step beside him, her hand drifting by instinct toward her sidearm, not as a threat, simply as a habit formed by years of doing hard things in dangerous places. "Draven," Greth Vaughn's voice followed them across the chamber floor. "You cannot simply leave. There are active treaties." Kael stopped. He turned back. "Every treaty will be honored until its natural expiration. We do not break our word. We are simply choosing not to renew." He met Greth Vaughn's eyes directly. "Good luck, Counselor. I genuinely hope the galaxy turns out to be as safe as you believe it is." The door opened. They walked through it. It closed behind them, with the sound like the last page of something important being turned. Outside, the human delegation waited. 51 people who had made this station their professional home. Engineers, attachés, trade liaisons, cultural officers, military advisors. All of them watching Kael with the same question in their eyes. He answered it before anyone asked. "Start packing. We leave in 48 hours. Every piece of equipment, every tool, every system, every file. We leave nothing behind except what was here before we arrived." General Pyotr Ranik, the sector military coordinator, a big man with a quiet way of carrying himself, stepped forward. "Sir, we have forces in 44 separate zones, ships, listening stations, supply depots. A proper withdrawal is going to take months. Then we start now. Send the orders. Full withdrawal. No exceptions. Voss said quietly, not quite under her breath. They will regret this. Kael looked at her. Maybe, but that is not why we are leaving.
The withdrawal took 31 days. Anyone who watched it happen would later describe it the same way, with a single word: quiet. No public statements from the human military. No dramatic last transmissions from outgoing ships. No farewell ceremonies. Human forces simply finished their final rotations, packed their gear, boarded their transports, and went home. General Rannick ran the operation from the carrier Resolute, which was itself the last human warship to cross back into human space. He stood on the bridge as they went, watching the tactical board update in real time. One by one, 44 sectors turned from gold to gray. "Sector 9?" he asked. "Last patrol out, sir. The Harrow crossed the boundary archer 11 minutes ago." Sector 9 had been a permanent assignment for 6 years. 3 major smuggling interdictions, 2 rescue operations following failed colony supply drops, 1 full engagement with a pirate group that had made the mistake of attacking a convoy carrying children being evacuated from a failing colony. Human forces had destroyed that group in 47 minutes. No one was replacing that patrol. The Council's own fleet was still organizing what it called a transition coverage plan. Rannick did not comment on that. He watched the sectors go dark and said nothing. At the same time, Research Station Clarity was going through its own kind of quiet ending. Dr. Owan Tsai had run the Xenobiology and Propulsion Research Facility there for 7 years, alongside colleagues from 5 other species. It had been genuinely productive work, the kind that mattered. He watched his team load the last containers onto the transport. Computers, prototype components, raw research data, models they had built themselves. Everything was inventoried and labeled and sealed. His closest colleague, a Monthari scientist named Zivek, stood beside him, watching. Zivek's feathered forearms were folded tight in what Owan had learned over years of friendship was distress. "The propulsion project," he said. "We were 3 months from a testable model." "I know." "There is no reason you cannot leave the designs. The Council did not vote to take your research, only to restrict your presence." Owan was quiet for a moment. "Zivek, what we built together, you keep. Any shared work, it belongs to both of us, and I would never take that. But what our team developed alone, that comes with us." He looked at his friend carefully. "And you know it is not really about the research." Zivek was silent. Owan sealed the last container himself. "You will rebuild. You are brilliant people, and you were doing important work before we got here." What he did not say was the part they both already understood. The human team had not simply contributed to the projects, they had been the engine of them. Humans brought something to research that was hard to name and impossible to replace quickly. A way of approaching problems sideways. A comfort with risk and failure that came from generations of living on a planet that punished every hesitation. You did not grow up on Earth without learning to think fast. The economic reports reached Trade Minister Muwara of the Plethian delegation in the 4th week. He read them in his pressurized office, his gill slits opening and closing rapidly with stress. Human merchants had closed not some of their stations, all of them. 217 stations,
across council space, every single one. And they did it with the same infuriating professionalism as everything else. Fair sales of inventory, generous severance for local staff, clean transfer of leases, no drama, no anger. Just gone.
Muara sent an urgent message to the Human Trade Coordination Office. The reply came back within a day. Polite, clear, final. Humanity has chosen to prioritize internal development at this time. We respect the Council's decisions and will not impose upon Council space or Council commerce. We wish you every success in your future endeavors. It was the phrase at the end that bothered him most. Every success in your future endeavors. The same thing you said to someone after a business relationship ended, when you were already thinking about something else. Like the Council simply was not important enough to be angry at. The raids began in the 5th week. A small pirate group hit a mineral processing colony in Sector 12. 3 ships, fast, targeted, gone before any response could organize. In previous years, human patrol vessels would have been on scene within hours. They maintained constant presence across the border regions. They knew the shipping lanes, knew the threat patterns, knew where to be before trouble arrived. The colony's distress call reached the Council Defense Coordination Office. A response fleet was authorized and dispatched. It arrived 79 hours later. The pirates had been gone for 3 days. Defense Coordinator Chinook reviewed the incident report with his ears flat against his skull. 8 colonists had been killed, supplies had been taken, equipment had been destroyed, and the response time was nearly 80 hours. He pulled up the old human patrol records. Their average response time to a distress call in that sector had been 4 hours and 20 minutes. More reports came in. Sector 7, Sector 19, Sector 24. Small probing attacks, each one testing what had changed, each one discovering the same answer. The answer was everything. By the 6th week, Councillor Greth Vaughn began to receive formal complaints from 12 different species delegations. He sent back careful, composed responses. The Council was adapting. Transition periods required patience. New systems were being put in place. Privately, he had begun to notice something he could not quite explain away. The problems were not concentrated in one area. They were everywhere. Military response capacity, trade throughput, research output, supply chain reliability, medical distribution in the outer territories. Everything was degrading simultaneously, and all the lines on all the charts pointed back to the same moment, the moment the humans left. He did not share this observation with anyone. 3 months after the withdrawal, High Speaker Vora stopped sleeping through her rest cycles. She would come awake in the station's artificial dark, her mind already processing the reports that came in daily, all of them documenting something getting worse. Pirate activity up, trade capacity down, colony world sending increasingly desperate communications, Council defense fleets consistently arriving after the damage was already done. The chamber had become a place of raised voices and accusations. Species blamed each other for failures that were not entirely anyone's fault. Coordination had always been the Council's weakness. It had not mattered before because something else had filled the gap, something they had not properly understood until it was gone. Councillor Raya of the Aventi people said it plainly in a session that was supposed to be about budget allocation.
"We removed the skeleton," she said, her wings folded tight with quiet grief. "We saw muscles and thought we understood how the body worked. We did not see what was holding everything in place."
Greth Van slammed his hand against his podium. "We are experiencing adjustment difficulties. Every systemic change produces friction. This will stabilize." 3 months, Raya said. Her voice was not loud. It carried anyway. "In 3 months, we have lost control of 14 colony worlds. Pirate attacks have increased by 380%. Our economy has contracted by 31%. How long before you call it what it is?" Greth Van had no answer. For the first time, he offered none. The truth that no one wanted to speak aloud was becoming impossible to ignore. The pirate clans had noticed the withdrawal before the council fully did. At first, they had been cautious, running small tests at the edges of former human patrol zones, looking for the response that never came. When council forces showed up days later instead of hours, the pirates grew bolder. When they grew bolder and still the response was slow, they began to coordinate. Defense Coordinator Shinnok presented his weekly report standing at his podium with the posture of someone holding himself upright through will alone. "We now have 4 organized pirate fleets operating in former human patrol territories. The largest has approximately 40 vessels. They are striking supply convoys, occupying mining infrastructure, and evading our response forces with ease." "Why cannot we intercept them?" someone demanded from the back of the chamber. "Because they are fast and we are structured for deliberation," Shinnok said flatly. "Human forces operated with independent command authority. Their patrol commanders could make tactical decisions immediately. Our system requires authorization from the Defense Coordination Committee for any engagement above a certain threshold. By the time authorization is issued, the pirates have moved." "Then change the authorization process." "We have tried 3 times. Each attempt fails because one species or another fears giving centralized command authority to anyone they do not control entirely." Shinnok looked around the chamber. "The humans did not have that problem because we trusted them. We do not trust each other the same way." That silence that followed was the kind that lands like weight. On Earth, Merchant Captain Danny Okafor was reading her 14th trade offer from council-affiliated buyers in a single week. She read it standing in the break room of the Human Trade Authority's regional office, drinking coffee that was better than anything she had ever found in council space. Her partner leaned against the counter. "Another one?" 15% above standard rate this time, Danny said. She deleted it. They were at 8% above last week. "Getting desperate." "Getting desperate," she agreed. "Tempted?"
Danny thought about the 8 years she had spent building her roots through council space. The bureaucratic delays, the permit renewals that required forms from 3 different committees, the time a council customs inspector had held her ship for 11 days over a documentation dispute that turned out to be a translation error. The way council merchants had always treated human traders as a necessary inconvenience rather than partners. "I spent 8 years on those routes," she said. "I made them rich. They thanked me by calling my species a death world threat to galactic stability." She set her cup down. "Now I run cargo between the independent stations in Reach Sector. Less profit, better everything else. They could offer triple rate. They could offer whatever they want." She picked up her next manifest. "When someone shows you that your presence is a problem to them, believe them the first time."
Admiral Petra Volkov monitored Council space from Earth Defense Command, her screens a constellation of red and yellow markers. Red for pirate activity, yellow for colonies in distress, blue for Council military forces, always arriving late. Her intelligence officer, a young man named Tomas who had not slept enough in 3 months, raised his head from his workstation. "Admiral, Sector 7, pirates have taken the orbital station above Ven Colony. The Ven are a non-military species. They have no capacity to respond." Petra studied the display. The Ven were good people. She had visited twice during joint diplomatic exchanges. They grew a particular kind of medicinal crop that was widely traded across Council space. They had always been quietly grateful for the human patrols that kept their lanes safe. Have they requested assistance? Through back channels, not official Council channels. Forward the message to the Diplomatic Corps with a note that it was received. Then send a reply to Ven Colony. She paused. Tell them we are sorry. Tell them all requests must go through the Council. Tell them the Council hopes responds quickly. Tomas did not move immediately. "Admiral, people are dying down there." "I know." Her voice was steady, and it cost her something to keep it that way. "We cannot save people from a mistake they have not finished making yet." She turned back to her screens. "We monitor, we document, we wait." Ambassador Kael Draven worked from a small office in Geneva, overlooking a lake. He received 412 formal and informal messages that day alone. Colony governors, military commanders, merchant guilds, private citizens, all of them asking for the same thing in different words. He responded to each one personally. "We understand your situation. We are deeply sorry for your suffering. All requests for assistance must be directed to the Galactic Council, which holds authority over your territory. We hope they act quickly." One message stopped him. It was a video from a Saurian military commander named Vorath, whose fleet was surrounded in Sector 21, outnumbered and taking damage, with Council reinforcements 8 days out. His message was brief. He was not asking for intervention. He understood he could not do that. But if any human vessels happened to be in the area with their transponders off, I would not report the coincidence. Please.
3,000 lives. An officer offering him a way to help that no one would officially acknowledge. It would work. It would be clean. The Council would pretend not to notice, and humanity could claim it had no knowledge. And it would let the Council keep pretending that things were manageable. It would let them avoid the reckoning that was the only thing that might actually fix this. He wrote back, "I am sorry. I cannot help you. Please direct your request to Council Command." Vorath's fleet was destroyed 41 hours later. Kael did not sleep that night. He sat at his desk and looked at the lake and thought about a man who had asked for a simple, quiet act of mercy, and the word that had been said to him instead. No. The right word, the necessary word, the hardest word he had ever spoken in his life. 6 months after the withdrawal, the emergency session that everyone knew was coming finally happened. The chamber was half empty. Some species could not afford the transit. Others were managing crises at home that took priority. 23 colony worlds were under pirate occupation, not raided, occupied. The pirates had stopped running and started ruling, setting up their own collection systems, their own governance structures, openly daring the Council to remove them. High Speaker Vora had aged visibly. Her exoskeleton had lost the polish it once carried. She moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who had not rested properly in months. Shinnick's report was the shortest he had ever delivered.
The situation is catastrophic. 23 worlds lost, 11 more under active siege. Our combined fleets have absorbed 51% casualties in the past 6 weeks alone. Pirate forces outnumber our available ships in 9 sectors. The chamber erupted. Counselor Raya waited for the noise to die, then spoke into the quiet that followed. I will say what I have been saying for 3 months. We need to send a delegation to Earth, not to plead, to negotiate, as equals, partners who made a mistake and are willing to own it. Greth Vaughn's voice came from across the chamber. We will not go to the Ashborn as supplicants. Then what? Raya turned to face him directly. Her feathers rose along her neck. You convinced 40 species that humanity was the threat. You told us we would be safer without them. 40 worlds are suffering. Thousands are dead. The economy has collapsed by 68%. She let the numbers sit. Tell us your plan to fix this, Counselor. You created the situation. Tell us how you solve it. Greth Vaughn said nothing. For the first time since Kael Draven had left the chamber 7 months ago, Counselor Greth Vaughn of the Soren Sovereignty had absolutely nothing to say. The vote of no confidence carried 42-4. Greth Vaughn left the chamber without speaking to anyone. His career was over. More than that, the philosophy he had built it on had been dismantled not by argument or debate, but by the simple, devastating consequence of being wrong.
Vora waited until the chamber was quiet again. I will lead the delegation to Earth personally. We will ask for humanitarian assistance. We will discuss the possibility of new partnership arrangements. We go as equals who have recognized our mistake, not as rulers expecting service. She looked around the chamber. We told ourselves we were removing a danger. We were removing the architecture that made us safe. Some lessons cannot be taught. They can only be experienced. In the silence that followed, everyone was thinking the same thing. They had been so certain they were right. The galaxy had a way of being very thorough in its corrections. Earth received the delegation at a small conference center outside of Nairobi. Kael had chosen the location deliberately. There was no grand architecture, no sweeping governmental spaces designed to communicate power. The building had large windows that looked out over open grassland. The light came through clean and golden in the late afternoon. It was, Vora would later tell her staff, the most honest place she had ever conducted diplomacy. She brought only 2 others, Raya, whose people had voted against the restrictions from the beginning, Muwara, whose trade portfolio had collapsed along with the shipping network he had once taken entirely for granted. Kael entered, with Commander Nadia Sains from the Medical Corps and Admiral Volkov in full dress uniform. He nodded once to Vora, respectful, not deferential. Thank you for making the journey, he said. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Vora replied. She noted the tone. Something had changed in it. He had always been respectful. Now the respect was horizontal rather than angled upward. It was the kind of courtesy between people who considered themselves the same height. That was fair. She had not earned more than that. I will not approach this indirectly, she said, once they were seated. The Galactic Council is in genuine crisis. 23 colony worlds under occupation.
68% economic contraction, supply chains that have essentially stopped functioning, defensive capacity so reduced that we are losing ships faster than we can commission new ones, thousands of deaths we cannot prevent. She put her forearms flat on the table. We came here to ask for humanitarian assistance, medical supplies, food distribution, protection for the convoys delivering both. People are dying of preventable things. Children are starving. We can pay for supplies, but we cannot get them through safely. If you are willing to help with that and only that, we are grateful. If you are not willing, we will face the consequences of our choices without complaint. Kael listened to all of it without interrupting. Why did you not find a way to let us help sooner? Sainz asked. There were individual requests, back channels, unofficial openings. Vora considered the question carefully. Pride. Greth Vaughn's removal helped, but there is also something else. We needed to see the full scope of what we had done. If you had helped quietly, through unofficial channels, we could have told ourselves it was not as bad as it seemed. We needed to know exactly how wrong we were. We know, Kael said quietly. Vora looked at him. You were watching. We were watching the whole time.
The silence in the room shifted slightly. Cyan's leaned forward. You should know that declining to help was one of the hardest things humans have done collectively in a very long time. We received thousands of direct requests, personal pleas, military commanders surrounded and asking for anything, any form of assistance. We refused all of them. Her voice was steady, and the steadiness cost her something visible. People on our side quit their jobs because they could not keep saying no. We had senior officers who needed to be relieved because the emotional weight was affecting their judgment. Vora absorbed this, and yet you held the line. Because the alternative was worse, Admiral Volkov said. If we had stepped in quietly, through back channels, through pretending not to notice when it was convenient, we would have let you avoid the lesson. And the lesson was the only thing that could actually make things better. She met Vora's eyes. You needed to understand fully what you were choosing when you told us to leave. We understand now, Muwara said. His gills moved slowly. We watched what you did, and we counted what we were gaining. We did not count what we were losing. We did not know how to count it, because we had never had to. Raya spoke for the first time. My people voted against the restrictions. I want to be clear that this was not wisdom on our part. We had simply worked more closely with human trade teams and noticed things that others had not. The rest of it, what humans represented as a system, we did not see that either. No one did. What would you have done, Volkov asked, if you had been us, if the positions were reversed? The room was quiet for a moment. We would probably have intervened, Vora admitted. We would have told ourselves it was compassion. It would have been, partly, but it would also have been pride, the inability to stand by and watch something fail. She paused. You were stronger than we would have been. We were not strong, Cyan said. We were right, and being right while people suffer does not feel like strength. It just feels like loss. Kael set his hands on the table. The humanitarian assistance begins immediately. Commander Cyan's will coordinate medical deployment. Supply convoys will be escorted. We will not engage in offensive operations. We will not extend our presence beyond what is specifically requested.
When the immediate crisis is stabilized, the convoys come home. "We understand," Vora said. "And after, you said you would not rejoin the Council. That relationship is finished." "We expected that." She looked at Raya, then back at Kael. "What do you propose instead?" "Bilateral arrangements. Individual species negotiate directly with Earth on terms that work for both parties. Defense agreements, trade frameworks, research partnerships, whatever is appropriate. Each species chooses what it needs. Some may keep their council membership and also have an Earth agreement. Others may find a direct arrangement serves them better." Muwara straightened slightly. "That would reshape the Council's authority entirely." "The Council shaped its own authority," Volkov said. "We are offering an alternative structure." The negotiations took 4 days, specific, detailed, point by point. No grand speeches, no symbolic gestures, just the careful, practical work of people determining what cooperation between equals actually looked like.
On the morning of the 3rd day, Vora walked outside alone into the grassland. The air was different from the station, heavier, more complex. It smelled of something she did not have a word for. Old life and new growth and open distance all at once. She understood for the first time why the humans needed windows. A young human groundskeeper working nearby noticed her standing and came over, uncertain whether to speak. Vora looked at him. "What is this place?" she asked. "This?" He gestured at the grass, the sky. "This is the savannah. Humans evolved here, right around here, actually, give or take 1,000 kilometers." Vora looked at the horizon. Open ground in every direction. No cover, no shelter within sight. "It seems exposed," she said. "Yeah," the young man agreed. "Everything out here wants to eat everything else. Predators, weather, disease. Humans were not the fastest thing on this plane, or the strongest. We survived by working together and by being smart." He shrugged, a little embarrassed by the length of his own answer. "My grandmother used to say this was the place that taught us the one thing worth knowing." "What is that?" "That none of us make it alone." Vora stood in the golden light for a long time after he walked away. The humanitarian operation ran for 11 weeks. Human medical ships reached 27 struggling worlds in the first 3 weeks alone. Supply convoys carrying food, medicine, basic manufacturing components, and agricultural equipment moved through lanes that human escort vessels held clear. Death rates in the affected colonies dropped sharply. Starvation in the outer territories declined. The sick received treatment. Human forces did exactly what they said they would do. No more, no less. When convoys were delivered, the escorts pulled back. When medical teams completed their work, they returned to their ships. There were no announcements, no ceremonies, no flags. Just work, done well, then hands released. The difference it made was immediate, not because the problems were solved, but because the worst of them were stopped, and stopping the worst of it gave the Council space to begin solving the rest. That distinction mattered enormously. It meant the Council had to do the actual rebuilding itself. Humans would not do it for them. The help was a bridge, not a crutch. individual species began reaching out to Earth within weeks of the humanitarian deployment. The Aventi were first. Raya's people had maintained the closest working relationships with human counterparts even during the restriction period, through the careful, limited exchanges that the Council had not technically prohibited. Their bilateral treaty covered mutual defense, agricultural trade, and a joint research arrangement in atmospheric science. It was signed without ceremony in a small office, 2 representatives from each side, a shared meal of foods from both worlds, and a document that had no grand proclamations in it. Just specifics, just what each side offered and what each side received.
The Plethians signed a trade framework 6 days later. Muwara negotiated it personally. He told his cabinet afterward that it was the most efficient diplomatic process he had participated in during his entire career. The human trade team had come prepared with specific proposals, realistic numbers, and clear limits on what they would and would not commit to. There was no posturing, no opening with an extreme position to negotiate down from. Just honesty about what partnership between equals could look like. Within 4 months, 29 of the Council's 47 member species had individual agreements with Earth. The Council still existed, it still met, it still coordinated on matters that genuinely required collective action, but it was a smaller thing now, more honest about its own nature. An institution for coordination rather than a structure claiming authority it had never actually been able to enforce on its own. Several species discovered they preferred the bilateral arrangement entirely. Others maintained both, treating the Council as a forum and the Earth Agreement as their operational relationship. Greth Vane had retired to a colony world in the Outer Territories after his removal. He did not speak publicly. He gave no interviews. The philosophy he had built and the coalition he had assembled had both collapsed under the weight of being demonstrably wrong, and there was no version of returning to public life that did not begin with acknowledging that. Kael Draven returned to the Council station 14 months after walking out of it. He came as a visitor, not as a member, not as an ambassador with credentials and a seat at the table, but as a guest meeting with a host. The distinction was important to both of them. It meant the relationship was different now, not worse, not better in a way that pretended the past hadn't happened, just different, more honest about what it was. Vora met him in a small office near the outer ring of the station, where someone had finally put in windows. She had made sure of it personally when the renovations came up. It had seemed important. They sat across a simple table with the stars visible behind her. "The reclamation of the occupied worlds," Kael said. "How is it progressing?" 11 of the 23 have been recovered. The others are in various stages. It is slow, complicated work. The pirates did not just occupy those worlds, they built dependencies, people who cooperated to survive, infrastructure that got redirected, supply chains that got rewired. She turned one forearm over on the table. It turns out that removing something that has established itself is harder than preventing it from establishing itself in the first place. "Yes," Kael said, "it is." She heard the multiple layers in that. She let them stand. "I want to ask you something I have been thinking about for a long time," she said. "Ask.
When you left this chamber, when you walked out that door, and the council had voted 40-6 against your species, after 21 years of service, after everything your people had done, were you angry?" Kael was quiet for a moment. He looked at the stars through the window. "Yes," he said, "of course we were angry. We are human. We feel things." He looked back at her. But anger was not useful at that moment. Being right while being angry is still just being angry. It does not help anyone. He paused. "We left because you asked us to. We stayed away because you needed to understand why you had asked. We came back because you asked again, and this time you understood what you were asking. That required a great deal of patience."
"It required something harder than patience," he said. "It required trust in the principle, even when it cost us something. Even when it meant watching suffering we could have prevented." Vora looked at the stars. One of them, very far away, was approximately where a pirate fleet had finally been dispersed by a joint council and Aventi operation 3 weeks ago. A small fleet, nothing like what human forces alone had managed in a fraction of the time, but it was the council doing it, learning to do it. That mattered in a way that a human rescue would never have allowed. "My predecessor in this position," she said, "left notes in the record about the early years of human involvement in council affairs, long before my appointment. He wrote that humans were remarkably easy to underestimate. He meant it as a criticism. He thought you presented as less than you were." She looked at Kael. I think now he was observing something true and understanding it wrong. You were not presenting as less. You were simply not performing. Kael considered this. "We have a complicated relationship with being seen. We spent a very long time on a world that punished anything that made too much noise. The predators came for the ones who stood out." He smiled slightly. "We learned to do the work quietly and let the results speak." "The results spoke very clearly," Vora said. "They did." Outside the window, ships moved through the dark in the practiced patterns of a station returning to something like order. Not the same order as before. The old order had been built on a foundation no one had noticed until it was gone. The new order was being built by species who had done the hard, uncomfortable work of understanding what they actually needed and what they could actually provide. It was slower. It was more complicated. It required more honesty from everyone. It was better. "What did humanity learn?" Vora asked. It was the question she had been saving. Kael thought about it for a long time. "That the most essential things are often invisible until they disappear. That trust is the actual infrastructure. Everything else is just built on top of it. And that being needed and being valued are completely different things." He looked at her steadily. "We had been needed for a very long time. We are still learning what being valued actually feels like." Vora held his gaze.
"Then we have work to do," she said. "Yes," Kael agreed. "We do." Outside, the stars did not care about treaties or councils or the complicated, painful, necessary education of civilizations learning to see each other clearly. They simply burned, as they always had, patient and enormous and indifferent to the small, determined creatures below, who kept insisting, against all evidence of difficulty, on building something together.
Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had never wanted to. They had simply shown up, done the work no one else would do, been told to leave, left with dignity, watched the consequences unfold without interfering, and then returned, when asked properly, to begin again. Not because they were the strongest, because they were the ones who understood that strength, real strength, was the kind that could walk away without burning anything down, wait without losing faith, and return without saying, "We told you so." In the end, it was not their warships or their trade networks or their engineering or their medicine that made the galaxy take notice of humanity. It was the fact that when the moment came to show who they really were, they chose to be exactly that, quietly, patiently, and without flinching, even when it cost them everything, especially then.